Hello everybody, welcome to another video presentation with me, Matthew Gill, Prophet and First Elder of the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ. Today is the 1st of May, and today we're going to be discussing the succession crisis and all that entails. So, let's get to it. Before I start my video today, firstly, I want to thank everybody who has been so supportive of me over the last couple of months. It's not been easy last couple of months for me. I've been suffering a lot with my Meniere's disease, and it's still not brilliant, but I'm having a good day today, so I thought I would take advantage of that good day and record this video, because it's been a long while since I've been able to really do that. I'm hoping to be able to bring you a Sunday service this week, but that will depend greatly on how I'm feeling and whether it's going to be viable for me to be able to stand up and deliver a sermon. If not, I would ask you to bear with us. These things happen in a small branch like ours, and especially with me suffering the way I do with my Meniere's disease. But I want to thank everybody who's been really supportive and sent me lots of messages of encouragement and emails, and has been very supportive towards me over the last couple of months. I would say that I'm not out of the woods. I'm probably not going to be out of the woods for a very long time because of the nature of the disease, but I will do my best to bring you as much content as I can when I'm feeling able to do that. I also want to, while we're talking about health, just send a big shout out to Steve Pinecker from Mum and Book Reviews. I know he's going through some struggles at the moment, and I want just to let him know publicly that we here at the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ appreciate you. You've been ever so good to us and allowed us airtime on your YouTube channel several times, and you are a really good friend, and I just want to let you know that we care for you and we love you, and that we hope you feel better soon, and that your health troubles will find a relief for you soon. So good luck and God bless to you, Steve. Okay, so today we're talking about the succession crisis. This is an issue that not many people know about, or they think they know about. So I'm just going to bring you a potted history of the succession crisis, and we'll see what the response is. Once again, if I can ask you, if you like this video, to like and subscribe, that always helps. And if you have any questions, send them to me at info@restoredbranch.com, and I will see if I can answer those questions for you. And check out our website at www.restoredbranch.com. So without further ado, let's talk about the succession crisis. It's a privilege that I have today to be able to be sat here to talk to you about this very special subject. It's an important and intriguing subject that the Restoration has, and I don't think it's talked about often enough. Firstly, I want to thank everybody who has expressed support for our work in the past couple of weeks, and for those who have watched our videos recently, allowing us to exceed viewing numbers that we couldn't possibly have dreamed of. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. Before we start, can I also remind you that if you like this video, to please like and subscribe it to help our YouTube channel grow and inform more people. So as I said, today I'm going to be talking to you about the succession crisis and try and teach you as much as I can about the succession crisis that took place in the church in 1844 after the death of the prophet Joseph Smith. Much of the information that I'm going to present to you today is common knowledge and is available online and also in the archives of many organisations in the Restoration. So it's not information that I have special to me. It's out there, you can find it. There are lots of books about it, so I would encourage you to read those books and try and find out as much as you can. There is nothing here that cannot be found if you wish to find it. It is my firm belief that we cannot understand the Restoration and its family of organisations today unless we understand the crisis and what it means to us today. So let's start this small adventure and open our minds and our spirits as we learn together. Let's go back a little bit and understand the past of our faith, and all the events that lead to what has been called and caused the succession crisis. So let's go way, way back. Joseph Smith Jr. organised the Church of Christ on April 6, 1830. Between that time and his death in 1844, both the church and Joseph's role within it expanded greatly. Even prior to the formal establishment of the church, Joseph claimed himself the title of prophet, seer and revelator. A little known fact about that is that it was unanimously supported by the other founding saints, and additionally, because he claimed to have translated the Book of Mormon, his title then expanded to prophet, seer, revelator and translator, which is exactly the same title that we use today in the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ. So my official title is prophet, seer, revelator and translator of the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ. But of course it's a mouthful, so I just refer to myself as prophet and first elder of the Restored Branch, and the first elder bit will become more clear to you later on. Because the church was organised rather than legally incorporated, its property needed to be held in trust by a trustee. So Joseph Smith became the church's trustee in trust. Initially, the highest leadership position in the church was that of elder, and church elders were sometimes called apostles interchangeably. Joseph's initial title in the church was first elder, while his friend and associate Oliver Cowdery was given the title second elder. So that's what we use today in the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ. We use the title first, second and third elders, as did Joseph Smith when he established the church. As I say, elder and apostle were interchangeable, so let's not get confused about that if we can. In March 1832, Joseph created a quorum of 3 presidents that would become known as the First Presidency. Joseph Smith became president of the First Presidency, a title which became associated with what is called Office of the President of the Church. We do something similar here in the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ, although we call as Office of the Prophet of the Church rather than President. Sidney Rigdon and Jesse Gores became Smith's first councillors in the First Presidency later. On December 18th, 1833, Joseph created what is called the Office of Patriarch over the church and ordained his father, Joseph Smith Sr., to fill that role. The presiding patriarch, as the office came to be called, often presided over church meetings and was sometimes sustained at church conferences as head of all other church offices. This is unusual because today we don't really associate the office of patriarch as anything other than a person ordained to give what is called, in some circles, patriarchal blessings. This is not what Joseph Smith's father was ordained to do. A patriarch is very much second in line to the prophet, and as I've just said, would be stand at the head of meetings in the absence of Joseph Smith. The office of patriarch is very interesting. I encourage you to find out about that office as much as you possibly can, but it's not the focus of today's video. On February the 17th, 1834, Joseph created a High Council in Kirtland, Ohio. This body consisted of 12 men, headed by the First Presidency. The High Council took on the role of chief judicial and legislative body of the church and handled such things as excommunication trials and approval of all church spending. This High Council became subordinate to the High Council of Zion, which was organised in Far West Jackson County, Missouri, later. Much later on, when other High Councils were established in newly formed states of the Church, the High Council of Zion took on a role of presiding over the lesser state High Councils. Cases tried in the High Councils of outlying states were regularly and routinely appealed to the High Council of Zion and then to the First Presidency. I want please you to be clear on this. This High Council, or this Standing High Council, or as it would also be called the Standing Council of 12, is not the 12 that Brigham Young was headed, we're going to get to that. In 1835, here we go, Joseph created an additional travelling High Council of 12 men, ordained to the office of apostle, to oversee the missionary work of the church. Once again, remember, apostle and elder are very interchangeable at this time in the church. It is not necessarily any more special a title. Thomas B. Marsh was made president of this council, which in practice was subordinate to the presiding High Council of Zion, or the Standing 12. For example, in 1838, when vacancies arose in the Travelling High Council, or the Travelling 12, it was the presiding High Council, or Standing 12, that filled the vacancies, and both were subordinate to the First Presidency. So already we have a hierarchy of councils taking place. That hierarchy starts with the First Presidency, then the High Council, or Standing 12, and then the Travelling High Council, or Travelling 12, which Brigham Young would later become leader of. That's the order of ascendancy at the time of Joseph Smith. When the presiding High Council of Zion was dissolved after the church was expelled from Missouri, Nauvoo, Illinois became the headquarters of the church. There, Joseph Smith formed a new presiding High Council led by William Marks, which supervised the High Councils of outlying states under the direction of the First Presidency. So, just to recap, when the church was expelled from Missouri, the church established itself as a new entity virtually in Nauvoo, Illinois, and therefore the High Councils and presiding presidencies had to be reconstituted in that new area. So a new Standing High Council was put in place, contrary to belief, and it was led by William Marks, who supervised the High Councils of outlying states as before. So yet again an ascendancy, First Presidency, Standing High Council or Standing 12, and the Travelling High Council or Travelling 12. In 1844, Joseph created the Council of 50 to be the living constitution of the kingdom, which in turn sustained Joseph as prophet, priest and king. This council consisted mostly of prominent members and associates of Joseph Smith, but also contained a few prominent non-Mormons from the Nauvoo area. The Council of 50 is a very interesting council. It's a very interesting part of the history of the church. It is a contested idea and is a contested narrative. However, there are many books about it. There are indeed councils of the minutes of the Council of 50 you can read. I have them here, and I also have a book about the Council of 50. I don't think the Council of 50 is what many people purport it to be. However, I do think that it was established and did take place at some time, but I think it was disbanded as and when Joseph saw fit for it to be no longer there. So, not long after events took place that would lead to Joseph's death. The succession crisis occurred after that violent death. So, while he's in Nauvoo, Illinois, things happen, things ratchet up very quickly, which leads to him being arrested and sent to Carthage and his death at the time. And that's when this thing called the succession crisis occurred after the death of Joseph Smith Jr. And it was a violent death, by the way. I think a very horrible death and one that could have been avoided. However, I think things were in place for it to have been a trap. But I've spoken about that before and it's not relevant to this conversation. So Joseph Smith Jr. died on June 27th, 1844. After that, the primary contenders to succeed Joseph were Brigham Young, Sidney Rigdon and James Strang, although it should be the other way around. It should be Sidney Rigdon, Brigham Young, James Strang, and William Marks. This significant event in the history of the Restoration precipitated several permanent schisms. In the months following the murder of Joseph Smith, it was not immediately clear who would lead the church. This was not an open and shut case. This was not clear who should lead the church, and it has led to the schisms today that still exist. Joseph's brothers, Hiram and Samuel, who had been designated by Joseph to succeed at this point, were also dead. Joseph's eldest son, Joseph Smith III, was only a boy of 11, so the chances of him stepping forward to lead the church is pretty much non-existent, not that his mother probably would have allowed him. Other men who were designated as successors, including Book of Mormon witnesses David Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, had been unfortunately excommunicated from the church at this point. As a result, the principal claimants on the scene were, as I've said, 1. Sidney Rigdon, the only remaining member of the First Presidency, the church's highest executive council, the presiding High Council of Zion, the church's highest legislative and judicial council, led by William Marks, and then, finally, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, or Travelling 12, the council in charge of the church's missionary program, led by Brigham Young. Please be advised that Joseph's widow Emma wanted the leader of the Standing High Council, the Standing 12, William Marks, to become the church's president. But Marks believed that Rigdon had the superior claim, he being on the First Presidency, and he was probably right. So, in a general meeting of the church that was convened in Nauvoo on August the 8th, 1844, Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young presented their respective cases to the church. As the only surviving member of the First Presidency, Sidney Rigdon went first and argued that he should be made not president but guardian of the church. Brigham Young argued that no one could succeed the fallen prophet. Instead, he proposed that the Quorum of the 12 Apostles be constituted as the new presidency of the church. A vote of the congregation showed that some supported Brigham Young's proposal, and soon after, Sidney Rigdon left Nauvoo and established his own church organisation in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. With Sidney Rigdon's flight, Brigham Young and most of the 12 Apostles assumed control of what was left of the church headquarters in Nauvoo. This must be remembered, is that Brigham Young, as the sole surviving member of the First Presidency, claimed authority in succession. In fact, if you read some of Joseph's pronouncements, this is a valid claim. I don't really think Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young had one of their famous pull sticks to see who would lead the church next, but it is an amusing picture if one wants to have a little laugh. Brigham was an intimidating person and was also politically very, very savvy. Without going into too much or a lot of detail, it is correct that both Sidney Rigdon and Brigham spoke to the gathering of the saints. As I understand it, Sidney Rigdon gave a pretty compelling speech as to the veracity of his claims. However, being savvy as he was, Brigham adjourned the meeting until later in the afternoon so as to put distance in the memory of the audience between his speech and Sidney Rigdon's claim. Then, in the late afternoon, Brigham gave a very powerful speech. He did a fair amount of mudslinging towards Sidney and spoke of Joseph's increasing confidence in the 12 and in Joseph's lost confidence in Sidney himself, which isn't necessarily true and cannot be backed up by any written evidence. In the later meetings, Sidney declined to rebut or speak on his own behalf, to defend himself and his record, and in doing so he made a serious tactical error against someone who was extremely tactical and extremely savvy in talking and political manoeuvring, Brigham Young. He then made an even bigger mistake by asking W. Phelps to speak on his behalf. Unfortunately for Sidney Rigdon, Phelps was a secret admirer and long-standing friend of Brigham, and in his growing position within the church, and went before the people and said, "If you want to do right by the church, uphold the 12. The result was an apostolistic juggernaut, and you know the rest, which is history. Many in the audience, however, but not all, voted for a temporary leadership of the church by the 12. The LDS Church today teaches that Brigham was transformed into a look-alike and sound-alike of Joseph, yet the search of the primary documents is far from convincing on this issue. In a current tradition, this was apparently taken as a sign that the apostles should be the temporary leaders of the church and not Sidney. The funny thing is, if you do your research, is that the first recorded evidence to this event was about 3 months after the conference and the vote. In other words, there is no contemporaneous account of the miracle taking place at all. It seems that a fair bit of propaganda and legend telling is being installed to make his claim seem better than it really was. As that legend took greater hold over time, more and more people recorded the event in their journals. Whether any of them actually saw it is debatable. To my understanding, most of the journal entries and their recording of this event happened 1 or 2 decades after the conference actually happened, so they cannot be relied on. They cannot be tested in veracity, and they certainly weren't contemporaneous. This inconsistency in reporting leads me to believe a great suspicion regarding the veracity of the account of Brigham Young transforming into Joseph Smith. Also, this is a very important issue, and it must be understood that the congregation did not sustain Brigham Young as president at that time, even those that voted for the 12. This is something that wouldn't happen for 3 more years, after which Brigham, as president of the Quorum of the 12, had been the de facto president of his church organisation for an extended period of time. A conflict with Joseph Smith's last surviving brother, William, was a factor that led the remaining members of the Smith family to eventually break with the 12. I don't know if many of you know that, but it is very true, and it must be remembered and noted that not one of the prophet's family chose Brigham. Not one. I'm talking about immediate family, not extended. They, along with Emma, did not trust him, and Emma did not trust him in the slightest. She wasn't a very big fan of Brigham. She told Joseph many times, and it is recorded, that she didn't trust him and that he would do better to get rid of him and to put him to one side. But it didn't happen, and these events took place. But Emma and the Smith family did not go west with Brigham Young. They did not endorse him as leader of the 12 or as de facto president or prophet of any organisation. However, meanwhile, while this is all happening, in the branches of the church in Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, and outside Illinois, a serious challenge to the leadership of the 12, and in extension Brigham Young, arose in a person of the name of James J. Strang, declaring himself a prophet and Joseph Smith's successor. Joseph Strang would go on to establish a revival organisation in Vory, Wisconsin, called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints without the hyphen. Meanwhile, at Nauvoo, the conflict between the church and not the church, or Mormons and non-Mormons, escalated into what is sometimes called now the Mormon War in Illinois. Saints in the outlying areas were driven from their homes and gathered to Nauvoo for protection, although at this point in the story there really isn't any real organisation called the church. There are lots of people who, like Brigham Young, who have followers and following, but the church really doesn't exist at this point as we know it. The Illinois state legislature voted to revoke Nauvoo's charter, and the city began to operate extra-legally. By the end of 1845, it became clear that no peace was possible for those remaining in Nauvoo, or at least those that followed Brigham Young. And so Brigham Young and the 12 under his control negotiated a truce so that he and his followers could prepare to abandon the city. The winter of 1845 to 1846 saw an enormous preparations for that exodus across the Great Plains, which is told wonderfully, if I can just get it out here, it's told wonderfully in this memoir here, Memoirs of the President, Joseph Smith III. He talks about that exodus and what he and his family were doing while that was taking place, and some of the things that Brigham Young and others who followed him did to Emma and to Joseph Smith III that were really weird before they abandoned the city. I know Brigham Young, according to this, made many pleas with Emma to give him property of Joseph, such as the inspired Bible manuscript, and other personal things of Joseph Smith, I think, to boost his claim. I mean, now of course the LDS Church have all those things because they've just spent an enormous amount of money to buy them. But at the time, Emma Smith was adamant that he would leave with nothing of Joseph's. So anyway, Brigham Young and his group of followers followed 9 of the 12 apostles west, establishing a way station at what is Winter Quarters, which is well known, but not before setting fire and burning down the semi-constructed temple, which was very nice of them. This is another thing that many people misunderstand. The only those saints or followers of Brigham Young, because Brigham Young had occupied the temple at this time with his organisation, and no one else was allowed near it. And they had dances and stuff in it before they left to go west, and it was decided that if he couldn't have the temple, that nobody could have the temple, and the best thing to do would be to burn it to the ground. And Emma Smith and Joseph Smith III talk about this in that memoir and in another book that Joseph Smith III wrote, which is very interesting. And Emma Smith talks about the burning of the temple and how it hurt her very deeply. But people don't know these things, and so they rabbit and repeat stuff that they don't really understand or don't really know. After doing and setting fire to that temple, they travelled to Nebraska in 1846 and entered the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. He initially planted his colony in the Great Basin, and then he returned to Winter Quarters in the December of 1847 and reorganised his faction of the church, establishing himself as the head of a new First Presidency. This reorganisation led to an additional schism within his own group, including the break with Alphaeus Cutler, who was a member of the 12, and what would become the Church of Christ or the Cutlerites, as well as Lyman Wright's group, who would go to Zodiac, Texas. In the end, however, Brigham Young's organisation exists today as we know it, headquartered in Salt Lake City, and is known to the world as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with a hyphen. So that's the history there of what happened with Brigham Young and his people. So the bulk of Sidney Rigdon's church, when they went to Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, dissolved in around about 1847. But some loyalists reconstructed a church organisation under the leadership of one William Bickerton in 1862, and he's still with us today, and he's doing very strong. It's called the Bickertonite Church, and they are very, 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 very good, and they are wonderful people, and they still exist today. I don't know if many of you know that, but they do. James Strang's church is still going very strong. However, it suffered its own significant schism in 1849, led by a former follower, Aaron Smith, no relation. After Strang's 1856 assassination, much of the remaining leadership fell away from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Strangites, but a small following remained loyal, and the Strangite Mormon Church is still going today as well. And although they have had a schism of their own between incorporated and not incorporated, they still exist today, and they are still pretty good, pretty strong people. Other leaders of other churches include David Whitmer, James Colin Brewster, James Emmett, Gladden Bishop, William Smith, Charles B. Thompson. They also established church organisations, and they had limited followings, and they did okay, I suppose, but they didn't have the traction that the LDS Church had. As I said earlier, and this must be understood, and it must be understood because it's important, that Joseph Smith's family, his widow Emma Smith and her children, continued to live in Nauvoo after the departure of Brigham Young, as did many other saints who didn't follow Brigham Young. They never followed Brigham at all, and this was to rancor with him all of his life. Brigham hated Emma. He despised her, and on one occasion even told Joseph Smith III and his brother, when they visited Salt Lake on a mission, that his mother was the devil and a snake, and that she was not to be trusted with the memory of their own father. I mean, the guts of this guy is unbelievable. In 1860, the eldest of Joseph Smith's sons, Joseph Smith III, claimed to have received the revelation to take his father's place as prophet and president of a new organisation of the Latter-day Saint movement. Eventually, this group gathered together many of the remnants of various Midwestern Latter-day Saints who had gone with no one at the crisis, but waited until the Lord would show them the way. So they were brought into what is now called the Reorganised Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. However,
Later in the future, they would also split into factions in 2000. One retaining the original name, the Reorganised Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the other would go on to call themselves the Community of Christ. That organisation retained much of the historical buildings, such as the Kirtland Temple and lots of other land and all kinds of, and most of the money, by the way. Whereas the other branches went on and then eventually became independent branches of their own, but within the tradition of the Reorganised Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the traditional movement, the traditional beliefs and teachings of the church, rather than what the Community of Christ have done, which is embrace many standardized Christian beliefs and teachings, where they today really aren't really recognized as what I would call a reorganized or restoration church, because they've embraced things that are very mainstream Christianity, and they have also proclaim that the Book of Mormon is not scripture and that Joseph Smith wasn't necessarily a prophet. So as I said, the others were going to call themselves independent branches, and they formed the Independent Branch Movement, which is still in existence today, and there's lots and lots of them. So others remained unaffiliated, however, and in 1863 a group of saints from Illinois and Indiana under the leadership of Granville Hendrick claimed the movement's original name, which is Church of Christ. This group was the first group of saints to return to Independence, Missouri to try and redeem Zion. They are now headquartered on the original temple lot in Missouri, picked out to build the temple in the city of Zion, and are known as the Church of Christ Temple Lot. They are still in existence today, although they have a very aging community. But they still own the temple lot, and unlike the Community of Christ, unless something drastic changes, really changes, they will never sell or give away that temple lot in Missouri. It's still vacant today. They still claim it. They still own it. And let's hope it stays that way. For the good of the work, I think. So, in a nutshell, this is a succession crisis. And it is in a nutshell. It's a very small nutshell. It's a lot more complicated than I've stated here. Lots of reading materials available, lots of studying to be done. Be very careful what you read and who has presented it. I like to read non-biased material as much as I can. I do, however, like how this episode is documented by Emma and Joseph Smith III in their books. I would recommend that you read her telling, and it is very interesting, and Joseph Smith III account is also extremely interesting. What I would say is history is always written by the victor, and Brigham Young was the victor in the end, no matter how much I despise him. One has to accept that he built a massive organisation, and the most dominant one it is. So dominant that it is now dominating the historical narrative, and we must fight against it or we will lose our voice and our birthright, because we have a birthright and we have a voice. And as I've said about the Kirtland Temple in my talk and on the Facebook page, it is so important that we do not let one organisation become so dominant about the narrative of the history of the restoration. Unfortunately, it's already happened with the Kirtland Temple. They're already presenting their narrative as the only narrative, and it's not. It is probably the most dominant narrative because they're so big and there's so many of them, but it isn't the true narrative and it isn't the only narrative. So I'd encourage you to make sure, if you are like me, you're not associated with them, but you are associated with the restoration, to make sure that your voice is heard and that your birthright is not given away, because it is your birthright. That temple belongs to you and belongs to the restoration, not to any one group. Just like the succession crisis belongs to everyone, not just to any one group. And not anyone's group or version of history should be a dominance over the others. I have tried to present to you today a neutral history of the succession crisis, giving both sides of the story and indicating who the parties were that were involved. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope that it's given you pause for thought. I hope that you've learned something new. And I hope that you have been able, you are going to be able to take this video and to study this subject more yourself and find out more about the succession crisis, which I think is an integral part of our restoration and our history. So I want to thank everybody again for the support you've shown to me over the last couple of months, and I would ask you to continue to pray for me at the moment. I'm not having a great time with my health, and to remember that this space is supposed to be able to allow people to talk to one another and to share things with one another. So be nice to one another, be kind to one another as much as possible. We're all going to have disagreements, we're all going to see things differently. That doesn't mean we have to hate one another, and I certainly don't hate anybody. I don't agree with everybody, I certainly don't agree with large parts of people in the restoration, but I don't hate them. We shouldn't be hating anybody. So please, love one another, make this space a healthy space to have conversation and debate. And I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, God bless, and stay safe. See you soon. Bye-bye.